Did the Italians and the British reach out to the Gobron Somalis for advantage in the Second World War? This is something that Virginia Luling writes about in her book, Somali Sultanate, the Geledi City-States 150 Years, a book published in the year 2002. Now, Virginia Luling was an anthropologist who traveled or went to Somalia beginning 1960s, and she kept on going back up to late 1990s. And she was studying the Geledi Sultanate, which is a sultanate that was very powerful at some point, especially the 19th century. And then, of course, while she tells us the story of that sultanate, she also tells us the history of Somalia. And in this part, she tells us the history, somehow, she tells us the history of the Second World War, especially between the Italians and the British. Now, in this part I'm going to read, she's talking about traditional medicine and magic among the Somalis. And then I come across this part. In the previous video, I talked about traditional doctors among the Somalis. Now, then we come to this part where she's talking about the magic among the Somalis. Now, magic that she's discussing are of two types. There is the dark magic, and there is we can call it the good magic, magic that is on the opposite of the dark. Of course, the dark we can maybe say related to Satan, and then the lighter one, or the good magic, related to God. And she tells us that these two were found among the Somalis. There were those who did black magic, and then there were those who used religion and the Quran and holy books to perform other types of magic. And she's going to tell us about this. It seems like actually this magic was so much believed among the Somalis, but even more interesting, the Europeans, especially the British and the Italians, came to believe that these magics used to work. And they reached a point where, if you are going to believe Luling, that they reach out during the World War, they reached out to the Somalis to help them win the war. And let's read and see. She writes, there are stories of feats that have no practical bearing but seem to be simply demonstration of power. Now she's talking about these stories of magic, and she's saying that maybe they were told to just demonstrate power. The Gobron, for instance, are said to be able to make eggs disappear and reappear again. Interestingly, I had the same power attributed to the captain who was the British district commissioner in 1940s. According to the story, he told a Geledi servant to carry a bowl of eggs to the kitchen, and when he reached the kitchen, the eggs had vanished. The captain told him to bring the bowl back, and the eggs reappeared. So there are these stories that were told, including by the British, that the Geledi people and the Gobron in particular, and the Gobron was this dynasty that ruled over the Geledi, had these magical powers, and they would do things that humans usually would not do. She continues, on the other hand, sihir may be deadly. Techniques reportedly include using a powder made from decayed fish, which appear in the black earth when the rain falls, dried in sun and ground up and put into food. So there was this belief in something called decayed fish, which is fish, I think could be mud fish or something like that, unless I'm missing something. And then it's dried and made into some powder that then could be put in food. And apparently this was not good. This is said to be fatal. Of course, it's poison, it seems like. Another method is driving a peg into a tree in the bush. The victim will die if the peg is not found and taken out. So there was also that magic. Such disreputable magic is of its nature secret, and people tend to attribute it to social groups other than their own. Outsiders think that it is practiced by the people of Afgoi in general. She continues, others attribute it to the Geledi and especially the Gobron. No, the nobles say the Jarer are Sihiro or Gedoro. So the nobles, the other Somalis, will say that the Jaher probably had the magic. The Jaher have this reputation everywhere, and it contributes to the association of Afgoi with sorcery. Then she continues, however, the most dangerous sorcerers are not local at all, but are said to live in the south, in lower Juba area. So the most dangerous of these dark magic kind of magicians were, of course, in the Juba Valley. Now let's move from the dark magic to the other side. The good magic, maybe call it the good magic or the bright or light magic, I don't know what to call it, the opposite of dark magic. Quite different from such practices and socially and morally highly rated are the wardi, divination by reading in the Quran, and takdar or asrar, techniques which employ the Quran or other books of Islamic learning, especially astrology, collectively known as Kutab Gab, lesser books, as opposed to the great book, the Quran. So, in the opposite of dark magic, there was this magic that was performed through religion, divination, using the holy books. And this was also very powerful. And we are going to see her explain that even the British and the Italians at some point reached out to the Gobron to help them with that power so that they can overcome each other. She writes, much of the power of the Gobron sultans in the past was ascribed to their command of Wardi or Asrar. So the Gobron, the sultans, used to be thought to have a lot of power that came from these holy books and the ability to do divinations. Their successful use of this was not only a matter of superior technique, but of a power or blessing they inherited, which made their spells more effective and their divination more accurate than those of others. So this seems like a power they will inherit from their parents and then give it to their sons or daughters. Their blessings protected the crops from the birds, the same power attributed to saints elsewhere in the farming districts of Somalia. The whole story of the Gobron dynasty is bound up with these powers. Yusuf Mahamud is a sultan who ruled Geledi in 1840s, maybe probably up to 1850s, was noted for his power of divination, Wardi, and owed to it his military triumphs. A century later, now, seems like he used to be very successful at the battlefield, and many people came to believe that is because he had these magical powers that he will use at the battlefield and win. And then she writes, a century later, it was said that the Italian government had consulted Sheikh Abdi Usman and asked him to foretell the outcome of the war with the British. Now, maybe could be now 1930s. There is another member of the Gobron dynasty, and this is Sheikh Abdi Usman. And the Italian approach him, and they want him to help them, tell them how the war was going to turn out. Now, I don't know whether they were actually told. And this is, Luling says she got this information from another scholar, Lewis, who wrote his document in 1988. Then she continues, a generation earlier, in the time of Usman Ahmed, the Gobron are believed to have warded off the Amhara invasion of 1908 by making a black ox enter the earth. He ran below the earth and burst out of the ground, terrifying the enemy and putting them to flight. So there was this story that was told that there was a time that the Amhara wanted to invade probably southern Somalia. Maybe the Ogaden could be, I don't know for sure. But the story is that the Sultan who ruled could be Usman Ahmed. He performed some of this magic, and then through the magic, the Amhara were not able to attack. This is a story that was told, and seems like this was a story that was widely told, such that it was picked up by some of these scholars and recorded. Again in 1944, it was rumored that the British Army owed its success in routing the Italians to the help of the Gobron using the same means. So it's also said that in 1944, of course, the British and the Italians were fighting in the Second World War, and the British decided to chase the Italians out of the Horn of Africa. They did fight for a moment, of course. The Italians conquered Ethiopia. They stayed there for 2 years, I think, and then the British were able finally to push them out. It was a huge war, and I remember I did have a conversation with an older gentleman who fought in the Second World War. I was very young. I was like 10 or 12 or 13 years, and I like listening to his stories. He fought in the Second World War. He fought in Somalia. Fighting, he was, of course, part of the British Army, and he was fighting the Italians. He told me a lot of very interesting stories, actually, from that war. So during this war, there are stories told that the British managed to chase out the Italians out of the Horn of Africa, thanks to the magical powers that were given to them by the Gobrons. I don't know how true this story is, but it's a story that was told. She says similar stories were current as late as the 1990s. So these are stories that remained and they were told from generation to generation up until 1990s. And I guess probably these are stories that are still being told in some parts of Somalia or the Horn of Africa. And if you've heard these stories, I'll be interested to hear. You can write in the comment section. Have you heard of these stories of the first? Have you heard of the magical powers of the Gobron dynasty? Is it something that people talk a lot about? And number two, have you heard of any conversations around the topic of the Somali magical powers being used by the British to defeat the Italians? Then she writes, the reputation of the Gobron as magicians is widespread, and for some people, especially those from rival clans, they are not practitioners of a sacred and licit art, but quite simply zihiro, evil sorcerers, and poisoners. So she writes that while the Gobron themselves viewed their magic and maybe their supporters or members of their own clans, maybe the Geledi Sultanate citizenry, believed that those powers were from God or from agents of God, we can even say. Those who were not their, who were their enemies or those who oppose them will often think or will often make statements like they were simply practicing witchcraft, we could say. She writes, Siad Barre's government reputedly tried to imprison some of the Gobron sheikhs and took all the magic and the religious books that the Gobron used through the generation to do their magical and religious rituals, though whether out of fear or in an attempt to stamp out reactionary practices is not clear. So it seems like Siad Barre decided to go after these Gobron sheikhs, those who were using these magics through the religious texts and books to achieve some goals spiritually. And he arrested them. I don't know whether this is something that is widely reported or was widely reported or is an action that remains in the consciousness of the Somali citizenry to date. I don't know. Maybe the older people might have heard of it or it was in the news then. But she says that Siad Barre had them arrested and their books and taken away from them so that they could not perform those magics again. Now, of course, there must be a lot of speculation. If that actually happened, there must be a lot of speculations after that. Of course, she says it's not clear whether he feared that they were going to do or to use those powers against him. And if he feared and then he did that, of course, there will be speculations that actually what led to his falling from power probably is those ones. Maybe some people maybe could be saying that. Of course, I'm not saying that's what actually happened, but I'm saying that opens the door for such stories to run wild. And probably it is, probably it's not. Now, I don't know whether those magical powers work. Probably they, as I said in another video, there are some things that we today look at least some of us, and we be like, that is superstition, and it's just superstition. Nothing happens beyond that. But it's possible that it's just that we've not discovered or we've not found scientific explanation to this. And as I said in another video, there was a time that Somalis told the Europeans mosquitoes cause malaria, and the Europeans said it was superstition. But maybe 50 years later, it was confirmed that actually mosquitoes cause malaria. So there are some of these things today we consider to be superstition. But maybe a few years down the road, there will be a way to scientifically prove them. So it's very interesting, especially that the British, if it is true, reached out to the Gobron and asked for help to defeat the Italians, and the help they were seeking is spiritual. Very interesting. And also that the Italians did seek the same help. Probably, if he says for the Italians, they just wanted to know how is the war going, or how is the war going to the outcome of the war. She does not tell us how it was, what information they were given. Of course, maybe if we read the text that was provided or the source where she got it from, because she says she got this from somebody by the name Lewis. Maybe if we got the documents written by this individual Lewis, where she got this from, maybe we are going to get more info as to whether or what response did the Italians get, and maybe some more explanations of how did the British approach the Gobron and how did that conversation go. Of course, yeah, again, there are always these things that we don't understand and we never understand. And sometimes it is true they actually happened, and sometimes it's just rumors that somebody starts, and then these rumors spread, and then before you know it, they are taken to be factual. I don't know whether this actually happened or did not happen. It's very hard to tell, but it's very interesting though. Those are my random thoughts.